Hello, everybody. I'm Jax James, NORML State Policy Manager, here for our Friday update. So let's talk about what has been happening across the country. There's some great moving legislation. Of course, I want to preface this with saying not every state is currently in a legislative session. So if you are curious about what's going on in your state in particular, I encourage you to go to normal.org/act. There's a dynamic map there. You can hover over your state. When you do so, it'll bring up any bills that are active in your state right now. So a lot of legislatures have been in session. A few have adjourned already, but there are still quite a few in play. And if you live in a state that has ballot initiative efforts, you will find a blog post that I created last week that'll give you some great updates on those. So what we're going to focus on today is mainly moving legislation. And as always, please put your state and where you're from in the comments. And once I'm done with my update, I'll come back over and I'll look and I'll see if there's any states that perhaps we have some other legislation that we can touch on during this live stream today. So on that note, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so, this week we've got a lot of movement in Maryland, New Hampshire, Delaware, Pennsylvania, other states. And so really quite a few good things to cover today, but I'm going to be starting out in Pennsylvania, and the first bill I'm going to cover in Pennsylvania is actually legislation that NORML currently opposes. So SB 749 would make it easier for employees in safe and sensitive occupations to be terminated and denied unemployment compensation if an employer makes a good faith determination that the employee is impaired by cannabis. This measure seeks to define impairment on the presence of THC metabolites in a person's urine at the levels of 15 nanograms or per milliliter or above. The bill would also allow such employers to force disclosure of a medical cannabis patient's status. The update on this legislation is that SB 749 was heard in the Health and Human Services Committee, and it did pass out of that committee with a vote of 7-4. It now advances to the Senate floor. So if you live in Pennsylvania, excuse me, please make sure you go over to today's blog and click on that action alert so you can let your legislators know that you oppose this legislation. Now, another item that is moving in Pennsylvania is Senate Bill 1167, which seeks to legitimize banking practices for medical cannabis businesses and addresses the lack of insurance options for medical patients who rely on cannabis. It allows for licensed businesses to deduct certain business expenses in their state tax filings and also permits credit unions to partner with cannabis businesses. The update here is that both chambers have passed this legislation and it now awaits the governor's action. So you can click on the link there and send a message to the governor asking him to sign that legislation into law. Moving on to New Hampshire. Two different bills we want to talk about in New Hampshire. First is House Bill 629. This would permit adults 21 and over to legally possess 3/4 of an ounce of cannabis and 5 grams of hashish. And in addition, they can grow up to 6 marijuana plants, 3 being mature, 3 being immature. Of course, it's great to see that statewide polling shows that 68% of New Hampshire adults support legalizing the small amount of possession of marijuana for recreational use. This legislation was before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it now heads to the House floor. So you can support House Bill 629 by going ahead and clicking on our link there. Now, there's another bit of legislation in New Hampshire, House Bill 1598, to legally possess cannabis by adults, and it establishes a system for retail sales. Overall, great bill. However, the legislation would only make cannabis available at retail state-owned stores, which would greatly limit participation in the market, and it also likely runs afoul of federal law. So after passing in the House, HB 1598 is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Ways and Means Committee on April 20th at 9 a.m. in room 100. So there is a link there where you can send your lawmakers a message. Of course, overall, we do support this legislation, but there are some amendments that we'd like to see. So make sure that you review the letter there and that you know what you are asking for amendments-wise when you send that action alert. Some really great news in Maine. I'm going to cover 3 different bills that have all been enacted and became law. So the first one is going to be Legislative Document 1957, which seeks to end discriminatory hiring practices within the state licensed cannabis industry. It does so by removing prohibitions in the law that currently prohibit employers from hiring those with criminal convictions for past drug offenses. Then we also have Legislative Document 1827, which allows retail stores in Maine to deliver marijuana products to adults located anywhere in the state as long as the store operates solely as a retailer. And then the last bit of legislation is Legislative Document 1928, which streamlines the state's medicinal access program and further limits the actions that law enforcement can take against registered medical card holders. There are other actions that it would affect as well, but the measure also expands patients' access to cannabis by allowing them to utilize telehealth plans and by authorizing registered caregivers to provide plants to qualified patients. Again, all 3 of these items in Maine have passed and have become law, so really great information there. I feel like I have been talking about the next state like every week because stuff has been happening. But I did want to make sure that we highlighted this again in Maryland. So Republican Governor Larry Hogan has agreed to let HB 837 become law without his signature. This is the complementary bill that goes with House Bill 1, which is a referendum. House Bill 1 is a referendum that would ask voters, do you favor the legalization of adult use cannabis in Maryland? So the House Bill 837 would define possession limits, facilitate automatic expunction, and if approved, if the referendum question is approved, lawmakers would still need to come back in 2023 to establish further rules and regulations governing a legally regulated cannabis market. So there is a link there where you can thank your legislators for allowing this to proceed. And of course, if you live in Maryland, it's really important that you stay tuned and that you're registered to vote and that you get out the vote in November so that we can ensure that HB1 passes so that we can have a regulated adult use market in Maryland. Now, the last state that I wanted to talk about today is going to be Delaware. So after members of the House failed to advance HB 305 by just 2 votes, new legislation has been filed by the same representative to legalize the adult use of cannabis. So it's a 2-part plan that the legislator has. The first part is House Bill 371, which would legalize possession of cannabis by adults 21 and up. It removes all criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce for adults, and possession above this limit and or the public consumption of cannabis would be classified as a misdemeanor. The legislation would also allow for adults to transfer cannabis among themselves within the possession limits and without remuneration. The update on HB 371 is that it's passed the Health and Human Development Committee and heads to the House floor. So definitely send a message to your lawmakers there to support. The second part of the plan is House Bill 372, the Delaware Marijuana Control Act, which will seek to establish a regulated adult use market in the state. It would provide for the taxation and regulation of marijuana products in a manner similar to alcohol. HB 372 has passed Revenue and Finance Committee and now heads to the House floor. So make sure you participate in that action alert as well. My understanding is that these bills have been fast-tracked, so likely we will continue to see rapid movement on these bills as the end of their session is coming pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to come back over the comments and see what you guys are saying over here. Hi, friends in the comments. All right, so we've got Mississippi, Indiana, Maryland, Illinois, Wisconsin, New York, Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, Iowa, Missouri, Alabama, Tennessee. All right, we've got some good states here. So let me kind of just let's go from the top, shall we? Mississippi, I believe, is not currently in session. I believe that their session has ended. And so in Mississippi, there's not currently an action that I have for you right now. Let's check out Indiana. The same is the case in Indiana. That session is completed. I talked about Maryland there, so definitely stay tuned on Maryland. I see someone here from Illinois, and so I want to point out that, of course, everyone, if you haven't dropped your state in here, you can still go to normal.org/act. And on that page, again, we have that dynamic map, and you can hover over your map and you can see what bills are moving through the legislature. But speaking of Illinois, I did want to let everyone know that legislation to expedite expungement and record sealing has passed both chambers and is now waiting the governor's signature. So those of you in Illinois, make sure that you click on that link to ask your governor to sign that for us as well. All right, let's roll over to Wisconsin, see what we got in Wisconsin. I believe that there is still some legislative items that are moving, but I just want to be 100% sure. Lies. That is a lie, what I just said. There is not. Unfortunately, there is not currently moving legislation in Wisconsin. But going to New York, there actually are quite a bit of bills that are moving in New York. So Michael, please make sure that you go to normal.org/act, hover over New York. You'll see all of those bills, and you can either take action on all of them or just pick the ones you like the best, of course, up to you. Hi, Daryl in Texas. Thank you for joining us. Just so you know, I know Daryl knows because I recognize you, Daryl. I know you, okay? But in Texas right now, we are actually in our off season. We have a 2-year session or cycle in Texas. And right now we are on the elections portion of our cycle. So we have the Texas NORML Marijuana Policy Voter Guide available, which people were using for the primary elections. It is of note that there are some runoff elections, some very important runoff elections. So please definitely check out the Texas NORML Voter Guide to guide you whenever you're voting in those runoffs. And then we have our election in November. And it's really important to note that just a few days after these legislators are elected in Texas, they start pre-filing bills for our session that will start in January of 2023. I did want to specifically mention that if you live in the city of Austin, Texas, there is currently a local proposition that would codify a resolution that Texas NORML worked with City Council on previously to remove any funding for THC testing or law enforcement time surrounding personal amounts of possession of cannabis and cannabis products. And so now that moves to a ballot proposition, which would codify it, which is just making it more long-lasting and difficult to repeal than the resolution. And that election is on May 7th, with early voting happening in just the next week or two. So if you live in Austin, make sure that you stay tuned to that. Of course, there are several other efforts, I believe, in San Marcos, Killeen, and up in the Tarrant area to make the same thing happen. So if you want to follow Ground Game Texas for more information on that, I encourage you to do so. I see some people from Florida right now. There's no current moving legislation in Florida. The session recently came to an end. There is some movement in Iowa, however. I see Tamara's in Iowa, so make sure that you hover over the Iowa map. I believe when I looked last, there was actually quite a few bills in Iowa that are currently moving. I see Missouri is there as well. I know that there's multiple bills in Missouri that are moving, as well as Legal Missouri 22, which is a ballot initiative effort that is going on. So in Missouri, I believe that what's really moving right now is a family protections bill, as well as legislation that would address legalization and decriminalization. So those of you in Missouri, make sure that you take part in those actions and also follow Legal Missouri 22. Alabama, your session is done right now. In Tennessee, hello, Tabitha from Tennessee. There were some hearings having to do with medical cannabis this week. So make sure that you are letting your legislators know how you stand on those issues and let them know about your support. All right, let's see. Any other one? Talking about the Schumer bill. So I do not deal with federal policy. That is Morgan Fox. But my understanding is that Schumer believes that there will be a delay in filing the bill, and it may not be until later in the summer. So those of you that are tracking the federal actions, when you go to normal.org/act at the top, that's where all of our federal actions are. So anyone who's watching today right now, you can definitely participate in those. So make sure to check those out. All right, just checking to see if I have any more questions in here. Okay, talking about Ohio. Thank you for bringing up Ohio, telling me where you're from. There are several bills moving in Ohio, one about legalization, one about letting doctors decide who should use medical cannabis, and one having to do with cannabis and autism. So you can participate in those action alerts there. All right. Now in Virginia, I believe that there is a new bit of legislation that NORML does oppose, and it has to do with recriminalizing of personal amounts of marijuana. So for Rick in Virginia, please make sure that you go and you check that out and let your legislator know that you do not support that. Talking about in Georgia, there was a medical cannabis bill moving last I looked. Let me see. It looks like it made the crossover date, but I am not sure its current status exactly. So in Georgia, there is that medical cannabis bill that you can engage on. All right, let's see. Any other states in here? West Virginia. I don't think that there's anything currently moving in West Virginia. But look, I have this handy dandy spreadsheet that allows me to actually tell you. Yeah, West Virginia session is completed there as of mid-month last month. So West Virginia, your legislative session is complete right now. All right. Oh, talking about Louisiana. Thank you for bringing up Louisiana. That's the last state that I see there. There are quite a few actions moving in Louisiana right now. We have, let's see. We have legislation on expunction, medical expansion, reciprocity, consumer protections, legalization, employment discrimination. So really quite a few bills moving in Louisiana. So please make sure that you stay tuned there. I did see one more person post asking about Wyoming. I do know that Wyoming NORML is working on an update to their ballot initiative there, which you'll find in my recent ballot initiative blog. But currently there is not legislation moving in Wyoming. So that is where we are at on that. I am going to just real quick let y'all know that if you go to normal.org, you will see there are several really interesting blogs that we put out recently. So New Jersey adult use marijuana sales are set to begin on April 21st. We've got a blog up about that. Of course, we've got a blog about the Illinois bill waiting governor's signature, and also covering what's going on in Virginia with Governor Youngkin and the recriminalization of marijuana possession or low-level marijuana possession. So again, I just want to encourage all of y'all to stay engaged. As we transition from these legislative cycles, we'll start focusing more on getting out the vote and talking about voting records and where people stand on these issues across the country. We do smoke the vote, and so we have some planning meetings over the next month to start getting everything up and running for that. So please make sure that you stay tuned for more. And if you are not registered to vote, register to vote. So on that note, friends, I'm just going to say normal.org/act, federal alerts at the top, followed by a dynamic map that you can hover over your state and engage in any action alerts there. Again, if you support NORML's mission, you can choose to become a NORML member, or you can be a NORML donor, either one time or on a reoccurring basis. And then lastly, if you're interested in being more engaged in your state, you can click that link there to find out more about the chapters that we have. We have chapters in many states, not all of them, but many states. So if you happen to be in a state that doesn't have a chapter, I also encourage you to reach out to some of your friends and see if maybe you want to start a chapter, and we can connect you with JM, who is chapter development, about that. So on that note, friends, I'm going to wish you a wonderful Friday. And I will be here next Friday, but it will be much later than normal because I have some scheduled meetings during the day. So you'll see me later in the afternoon. So just a heads up on that. I mean, unless I change it to the morning. Listen, don't get me making promises on that, but I'll try to. All right, guys, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to connecting with all of you next week. Take care. Oh, wait. Did I have one more thing? Nope, that was it. I'm sorry. I thought I saw one more state pop up and I was going to try to address it, but I didn't. All right, for real. Bye now.